Kyle here from allmediareviews.blogspot.com. I'm going to do another artist feature, random artist feature, like I did last week. Today it's going to be Dream Theater. I've decided to do this. I'm going to maybe split it up because I don't know how long this is going to be. Hopefully it will be shorter than longer. And I'm not actually going to show a lot of the physical copies of the albums, the CDs that I've got, because that would take too much work at this point. Maybe in a future video I'll do that. But anyway, Dream Theater are a favorite band when I was growing up, when I got into music. I was exposed to them really from being a Rush fan. I grew up with Rush. I loved Rush when I was in high school, and was on the news group in 1994 and 95 when I was at college. And all these Rush fans were talking about Dream Theater, comparing them to Dream Theater, or comparing Rush to Dream Theater, who was better, and I didn't really understand it. I had heard Pull Me Under on the air a few years ago, but didn't know who it was. So it's kind of sad because they actually had played in Minnesota and I didn't even realize it a couple times. But anyway, so I heard about them, and then I checked their music out, of course, got all the albums at that point. That was May of 1995 was really when I became an official, I consider myself an official fan of Dream Theater. But just going chronologically, the first demo they put out, they were known as Majesty, I really do enjoy, even though it is just a rough sounding demo. The songs are still good. And even Chris Collins, the original singer they worked with, the members of at that point, which of course Mike Portnoy, John Petrucci, John Mayung, who met at Berklee College of Music, and then Kevin Moore, who was a friend, I believe, of John Petrucci's growing up, but in New York or Long Island, where they were, that part of New York. Anyway, so I got the Majesty demos, and then eventually Chris Collins, of course, didn't stick with them. And then I actually have an instrumental demo they put out after that, eventually with some covers, among some bootlegs I have, because Dream Theater is one of those bands that people have bootlegged for years. But, of course, then they got Charlie Dominici, and they put out their first album, When Dream and Day Unite. When Dream and Day Unite, I mean, some people don't like it. Some people think it's their worst album. Personally, I think it's a really good album, even though it does sound a lot like, has an 80s tinge to it, and probably sounds maybe the most Rush-like among all the records, which, especially even like late 80s Rush, Presto or Hold Your Fire. But specifics on I would talk about the Majesty demo, but specifics on When Dream and Day Unite, my favorites probably being The Killing Hand, that's sort of the Yitzhak Jam instrumental, Fortune Lies, Status Seeker. Status Seeker is probably the catchiest song from that record, and was, I think, one of the singles they released. Afterlife, Only a Matter of Time. I think Only a Matter of Time is the one that has the lyrics that Kevin Moore wrote that a lot of people really enjoy. Yeah, the ones who helped to set the sun, and Light Fusing Getaway. So I ended up, this is a first pressing I found at Half Price Books a few years ago. In fact, this might be a promo. Yep, MCA Records, 1989. So then, of course, they didn't stick with Charlie Dominici, and looking for a new singer, Steve Stone, John Arch of Fate's Warning. Actually, I've definitely heard, and you can find them probably on YouTube, demos of him singing The Killing Hand and I want to say Fortune and Lies, which, I actually really like him, but John Arch wasn't destined to be a rock star, unfortunately, after his experience with the Fate's Warning and leaving Fate's Warning. So then they got the Canadian guy, Kevin Labrie, who had to change his name to James because they already had two Johns in the band. They didn't want to have two Kevins as well, so he took his middle name. And they released Images and Words in 1992, which is still probably their most well-known record. I don't do how much showing of these vinyls, but this was released on Brookvale Records a few years ago, and I think they're just standard black 180 grams, so nothing really special. But, Images and Words, besides Pull Me Under, of course, the 8-minute song that was on radio and MTV frequently, although at some points it was edited on MTV, I know. My favorite song from Images and Words probably still remains Learning to Live, the last track. Just the progressive element to it. The falsetto, the high, whatever it is, E or F that Labrie hits. But anyway, Metropolis Part 1, The Miracle and the Sleeper, which of course they later released as Metropolis Part 2 as a follow-up, Scenes from Memory. Surrounded, Take the Time. Take the Time has a jazzy feel to it. Another Day, of course, has Jay Beckenstein of, why am I spacing on this band name? Anyway, Under a Glass Moon, even Waited for Sleep. This is basically a perfect record to me. It's not my favorite Dream Theater record, but for nostalgia reasons, it has a lot. It holds a lot, and it still holds up, I think, as much as I know after reading the biography they did, the production on some of the stuff like the drum sound, the band or whatever. Some of the people I have issue with on the snare sound, I think, is Portnoy. But anyway, it's still, landmark record for them and their most well-sold, their most well-known record. Then, of course, in '94, they released Awake, which is my favorite Dream Theater album, even though originally it wasn't. Labrie is more growly, as he's been described. When I first heard this record, I did not like the vocals that much, but they grew on me, and I grew to appreciate them. Specifically for songs, Scarred, maybe my favorite Dream Theater song. That and The Change of Seasons, the original demo, probably I still hold as my favorites. It's one of these emotional songs with, it's got the composition. I don't know how else to say it. The way that the song flows, there's no dead spots, and it just has that aggression, but also passion and sort of, I don't know, there's a lot of elements to that song that just make it so good. It's perfect. It's like Rush's A Natural Science. It's 11 minutes, and not a second of it feels wasted. I also really love the last song, of course, Kevin Moore, who left the band certainly after this was released, Space Divest. Even though it sounds like a Kevin Moore piece, that again is hugely emotional, especially with the samples and the floating synths and everything. And they finally played it live a couple of years ago, even though Kevin wasn't with the band, but didn't even sit in with the band. But anyway, why is Awake my favorite record overall from Dream Theater? I mean, I think it's because it's got that sort of huge dark imagery that just sort of speaks to sort of the people that, I don't know, that are misfits, and society doesn't really understand them or understand their tastes. I guess that's part of this whole album's like that. But I mean, everything down even to the album art. This is the way that this is a Brookville pressing. The stain they use on this is gray, whatever, blue gray. Anyway, not to go on too much longer about Awake, but I mean, A Mind Beside Self, that whole trilogy, Erotomania, The Mirror and Lie, which I think of together, Lifting Shadows Off a Dream, even though it sounds a lot like a U2 track, is a great sort of uplifting song, kind of a contrast to a lot of the rest of the record. 6 O'Clock, which usually play on Christmas Day, and I always think of the samples, but the drum fill is kind of trademark of Mike Portnoy. I mean, this is Innocence Faded. The outro on that is just terrific. So, but moving on, then of course they released A Change of Seasons, which I don't have my physical copy to show, but I love the actual composition, even though as I stated earlier, the original demo was my favorite. The lyrics are different. Labrie's vocals are different, and they're actually a fair amount higher. He does his highest of highs, maybe the most extreme falsettos on that at points, but it works for some reason. I don't know. He did his sort of Geddy Lee wailing, and the Rush fan in me totally loves that. But anyway, so that was released in '95. I played the hell out of that thing. And then that was with Derek Sherinian, because Kevin Moore had left the band. Derek Sherinian played on Change of Seasons, and he played on, of course, Falling Into Infinity in 1997. Their attempt at being commercial, the most overt attempt, when they were having to listen to record label execs, wanting them to write a hit single. At the time, this was totally looked down upon. It was not, it was their attempt at being commercial, try to write radio singles, and there was a lot of songs that didn't even make it onto this record that were some of the best songs that they wrote, including Raise the Knife, The Way It Used to Be, Speak to Me. I love that track. And even the Metropolis Part 2 original composition, which doesn't record it or anything like that, but there's a studio tape that actually surfaced a number of years ago, and they were very creative. Even after Kevin Moore had left, there was a lot of creativity going on in the band, and even this record reflects that. From Trial of Tears, the epic that closed it, which some people say the intro sounds a lot like Xanadu from Rush, but it still works. To Lines in the Sand, which I became a King's X fan right after Doug Pinnick, or right before Doug Pinnick had sang on this, or I knew about Doug Pinnick. But that's a very groovy, has a great groove riff to it, among other parts of that song. And Hell's Kitchen, this instrumental, Peruvian Skies, which is sort of like Metallica meets Pink Floyd. And of course, when they played Peruvian Skies live around that time, they went into both Have a Cigar and Enter Sandman. New Millennium, Take Away My Pain, like the lyrics on that song specifically. Even Anna Lee. The only song I'm a little not crazy about is Just Let Me Breathe. I think, even though the lyrics are sort of interesting with the references to Kurt Cobain and Shannon Hoon from, who was it, Blind Melon, that took their lives. I've never really loved that song other than sort of like the middle section. And Burning My Soul, the first single they released on this record, along with Hollow Years, even though that's sort of a piano ballad of sorts. It's still a good song, and if you take a look at the vinyl that Brookvale released, they made it in like splash blue, kind of not aqua, but it looks almost like some like water you might go swimming in or something. So anyway, that was with Derek Sherinian. His influence is pretty clear cut. You can hear the differences between him and Kevin Moore. But I think Falling into Infinity is an underrated record. And I think history is probably being a little more kind to it than it was at the time. But I never hated it. I think at the time, I was expecting something a little more masterful from them. And I was one of those people that listened to it, bought it, liked a lot of it, but still thought, this is Dream Theater. This is my new favorite band. This is their new record. Awake and Images and Words especially. I was, obsessed with it at the time. So then in '99, right before they'd done Liquid Tension Experiment with Jordan Rudess, who had joined the band briefly in '94 before Derek Sherinian had joined. But they finally actually were able to have him come on board after the Liquid Tension Experiment experience with Tony Levin. And they released Scenes from Memory, the follow-up to Metropolis Part 1. Of course, Metropolis Part 1, the title off of Images and Words, was sort of half as a joke, but it turned out this to be critically well accepted. I played the hell out of this thing the fall of '99, the winter of 2000, and saw them and play the whole thing live in 2000, February at the State Theater in Minneapolis. But Scenes from Memory is, I remember trying to open this up, and I may not be able to open it up. Anyway, Scenes from Memory is a great concept album. It has a lot of highlights. It's certainly a record that's best experience for my personal feeling when heard all at once. But I would say the highlights, specifically the final track, Finally Free, is my favorite. Sort of the conclusion to the whole story, or even though it's sort of told after the fact, but it just musically works. It flows and it segues really well. Strange Deja Vu, Beyond This Life. Beyond This Life is really busy and technical at points. It's very much of a prog tune. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people that got into Dream Theater that never liked them before just for that one song. That and The Dance of Eternity, probably. Spirit Carries On, which all the references to Pink Floyd, and I can't remember which track off the Dark Side of the Moon. I think it's Speak to Me, maybe. I can't remember which track it is, but the vocal harmonies with Teresa Thomas, and people always think, oh, this is basically they're trying to make a second piece to a song that would go on Dark Side of the Moon, but it is an emotional song. I remember when I heard it, it sort of caught onto it and just got to me like, this song should be on the radio. I don't think it ever got played on the radio 6.5 minutes. Anyway, the rest of the record, Home is another favorite, especially among the metal people. And it's got a great riff. It's got that sort of Middle Eastern sound, which is very much Jordan Rudin influence. But Fatal Tragedy, I mean, it's a lot of highlights of the record, the concept, the story, well, maybe a little cheesy and very similar to the Dead Again, the movie, which I came to learn. And you actually, if you really tried, you can sync it up. If you put the track, I just concluded if you put the tracks in a different order, it would sync up perfectly to that movie. But yeah, I mean, is it my favorite record? Of course, I just mentioned Awake is my favorite record, so it's not my favorite Dream Theater, but I would put it certainly in the top 5, maybe in the top 3 or 4. So, which I'm not really loving, someone who loves to do lists. So then after that, they followed that up with 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. Again, I don't have my physical copy right here to show, but that was the second album with Jordan Rudess, of course. And as it turns out, I think it was the last great record, and I would actually probably rank it slightly above Scenes from a Memory. The first disc, which has a lot of sort of standard Dream Theater songs, including the first song, which is the first part of the 12-step suite that Mike Portnoy wrote in his Alcoholics Anonymous rehab process. A lot of people love The Glass Prison. I like it. I always liked it, but I always find people would over-mention it. I do like the Chapman 6 solo and some of the other parts to it. And among the suite that were written after this, I think it's still the best part. But as far as the rest of that first disc, Blind Faith is amazing, the unison section especially. But Blind Faith is one of the best songs they've ever written. Maybe the best song they ever wrote with Jordan. And Misunderstood, even though the outro is very awkward with that angular guitar phrasing that Petrucci did, it's still a very kind of memorable, earwormy song, and one of the better tracks that Dream Theater's ever done, and on the record on 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. And then The Great Debate, which some people call like Rush meets Tool, which is like whatever it is. I think it's in 7/8. The use of the samples, while initially I really liked, can get a little bit repetitive and you're hearing the same voices. It still works, especially within the flow of the record. And it's got that really heavy, in-your-face, punchy riff throughout that record, and throughout that song, rather. And then Disappear, which closes out the first disc. It's a nice ballad. I always will probably think of it for the fan-made video that was done with, I want to say Hamlet, the modern-day Hamlet, with Julia Stiles and Ethan Hawke and some other actors. But anyway, so then the second disc, of course, is a 42-minute suite, which, for the most part, is pretty much of a masterpiece of a composition. My favorite parts of it, even though I think of it as one song, probably are About to Crash and About to Crash Reprise, that hook on both those, especially the second part, the reprise, rather. And then Solitary Shell. Some people could accuse it of ripping off Peter Gabriel again, but at least the first half of it. The second half has got that sort of unison part with Petrucci. But anyway, it's really catchy and a poppy piece, and another song that probably should have been on the radio, while Coldplay and some other bands, U2 were being played. It could have easily been in rotation with that, but it never did. But the rest of it, of course, I'm spacing on the titles. War Inside My Head and Test That Stumped Them All are both, definitely contrast to different styles within that part, but they segue somehow really well. And the Losing Time grand finale also really works as sort of an epic closing piece. Oh, and Goodnight Kiss, which is a wonderful ballad. So with the little samples of the baby and all that stuff, and so it is a concept of whatever 6 different people that are dealing with mental illness and some other things. I've always wanted to try watching the movie with Winona Ryder and Angelina Jolie, which I'm blanking on, but I always thought that would sync well with that, but maybe someday. Anyway, I'm gonna end this Dream Theater sort of random favorite feature for now, and talk about the stuff that's been released since 6 Degrees, although I'll just state that 6 Degrees was the last record I really loved from Dream Theater, and ever since they've released albums that have songs I really like, to bordering on love, but none of them have been really to my taste as much. But I'll try to go over those at least as tactfully, but also honestly as I can when I do that. Thanks for watching. Bye.